I like to talk about this as having a compost heap in the back of my brain, right? So I'll get an idea, and sometimes that idea will be for the mechanics of a game that's in search of a setting, search of a theme, something like that. And I'll start working on it, and I'll slap a theme on it, and something about it isn't working right. So I throw it on the compost heap. It's not discarded. It's just going to sit there. Something might grow.
There are just some people I can talk to for hours, and Eppy was one of those people. We cover his horror game Dread and a lot more. Wait until you hear about his concept of play storming. There's a good chance you've never heard of Monkey Dome, but after this episode, that's all you're going to want to play. Swords Without Masters has an origin I never expected, and we talk about what it means to find the voice when you're creating a game. We also learn about the iterations that led to the Annie Award-winning game Dread. Make sure you stick around to the end to hear about a sword duel system that Eppy is in love with, and I can't wait to check it out. Okay, sit back, relax, and enjoy my time with Eppy.
You stand over the dead bodies of all the demons you just slayed in this room without breaking a sweat, only to discover that the door is locked. Okay, you roll lockpicking. Ooh, no. Okay, how about you roll strength to break it down? That's a fail too. You're stuck. Crap.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Bruder.
And I'm Kristen O'Neill, and you're watching Disney Channel.
And when we're not making Thin Places Radio, we are listening to Tabletop Talk.
See you there. Okay, well, perfect.
Nailed it. Got it one.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today we're talking to Eppy Ravachol, a game designer and author known for Dread, the horror role-playing game that uses Jenga, and his source and sorcery fiction, which can be found at www.worldswithoutmaster.com. He and fellow game designer Emily Care Boss live in a prehistoric lake bed in Western Massachusetts, where they tend to the needs of the sole survivor of a lost constellation of space wizards. Eppy, welcome to the third floor.
Well, thank you for having me.
I love it when I get creative introductions from guests. That's good. I guess the first question I have to ask is, do you in fact live in a lake bed?
Yeah, it's where we are was a prehistoric lake bed. It's not currently, although occasionally my basement is in fact something of a lake bed. We're between two mountain ranges. Western Massachusetts mountain ranges. So don't go thinking like the Rockies or anything like that. But yeah,
I'm from upstate New York in like the Skaneateles Finger Lakes area.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So we have the glacial lakes there, obviously, that were formed during the retreat, and the Adirondack Mountains are not the Rocky Mountains, but they're mountains.
No, they're big. They're decent.
Yeah, and I've been to your part of the world there too. It's so pretty. So pretty.
I mean, I have nothing to do with that, but I appreciate it. Yeah, it's nice.
Don't you like how we say that, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, you're welcome, Craig. I had it all set up for you. So before we get started and understand that this is obviously a podcast. So when I do these interviews, we're on video right now, which our audience can't completely appreciate. But for those of you listening, when Eppy came on the screen for us to start doing it, I saw that he had like a store rack of comic books behind him. And the level of envy, Eppy, I have for you right now, I cannot even describe to you. I don't know why. Like, I just think it's so cool when I see like people have like store racks and then they have their comic books stored in there. So let's start there. Have you always been a comic book fan?
Yeah. Back in my high school days, so several decades ago, I used to work at a comic book store. So,
oh, no kidding.
Yeah. No, I have a great love for comics. I fell out of collecting them for quite a few years because, I mean, we all have our financial ups and downs, and it is not a cheap hobby, and it doesn't get cheaper.
No, I got priced out. And part of it is because I'm an old dude. So I remember, 55-cent Marvel comic books, and Man, I would loved going to the comic book stores, and I would go like 2-3 years between visits as I became an adult. And like when I started seeing $4 or $5 for those damn things, and I hate sounding like that guy, but I'm kind of that guy. It's just like
it's tough. And like I have nephews that are really, really into comics, and now I'm of the age where I'm like, I'll just wait till it's collected and then pick it up then. But this rack, there's some new stuff on the rack. I don't want to spend too much time focusing on the rack, but the whole purpose for getting this rack was that when we got, well, actually it was after we got married, but before we moved into this place, which we have now, my comic collection had been stored like at my parents' house with friends, like it was moving around, and it all kind of came back to us when we moved into this house because we'd have the room for it. And then my wife, Emily, has had her own comic collection. So we combined them. We alphabetized them. We put them all out on the floor so we could see what they were. Took pictures, made my nephews very envious, and then stored them in the wall behind me. And so
like a crawl space, or
so it's very apt that this is the third floor, because I'm literally on the third floor of my house right now. So you kind of know what this is. I've got an attic that's finished, and so that's the part of the roof that doesn't meet up directly with and so there's like a little crawl space that we store things in.
Cool.
And the rack is there so that we rotate it, or we try and rotate stuff so that we have like the old comics out that we pick up and read from time to time.
Cool.
Yeah, just kind of like, but yeah, this whole, I'm not gonna, again, we're not on video, so I'm not gonna do the 360. But this is our gaming floor.
Yeah.
And so I've just got largely board games over there, a bunch of role playing games over there, some role playing games. This is the room I dreamt of having when I was a kid. And so,
do you realize like literally you're me right now? Because that's exactly what happened here, right?
Yeah.
So my wife and I are looking for a house, and I work from home. I have for the majority of my career, not just when it became trendy. And, we're looking around, and, I said to her, look, it'd be good for me to have my own space for work. And this is masterful on my part. You know how you see all my gaming shit everywhere?
Yeah.
If there was a place you didn't have to go to where you would never have to see it again. So we ended up finding a place that had a refinished third floor to it. And that's where all of this comes from. So that's fantastic.
That's what sold us on this. When we came to this house, it was for an open house. Okay. So Western Massachusetts, these houses are old. Mm-hmm. Like our house is probably a little over 100, probably around the 1900s is when it was 1900-ish, not like 1997. Right. But and it had gone through several renovations and things between then and when it got to us. But a lot of these houses have very short ceilings, like the tall enough ceilings on the first floor, but and I'm 6'3", so yeah, whenever we when we were shopping, whenever we went into a house, first thing I did was go up to the second floor, because I would you don't want to fall in love with a kitchen or something like that. And then, so we went up to the second floor, and it was plenty high and whatever. And we just turned the corner, and we saw that there were stairs going up again. And we're like, all right, we'll start at the attic and work our way down. We expected kind of a hot, whatever. But no, the whole attic is one room, and they were using it as a master bedroom.
Oh, so wow.
That, they had a bed here, and then they had like exercise equipment and whatnot. It was, the length of the house.
Yeah.
And we both were like, this is our gaming room. So this is it. This is what's happening. So, which is weird, because I have a deep nostalgia for gaming in basements.
Right.
And, but I think this is the better option out of the two. Like if I had to decide now, but I still have a very deep fondness for basement gaming.
I think one of the best ways for me to describe, and I'll be interested if you can relate to this, one of the best ways for me to describe maybe the last 15 or 20 years of my life is adult Craig with adult money satisfying 12-year-old Craig who had no money. You know, like I see a game and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to buy that. Or I see that. Yeah, I'll buy that too.
Yeah, it's definitely been like a it's they're the promises you make yourself when you're a kid that you forget but you fulfill. Yeah. And then there's the promises that you make yourself, and when you grow up you're like, no kid, you're not getting that. That's not happening. And it's been interesting seeing how those pan out. Yeah,
it's very true. It's very true. So, Eppy, I'm going to give you the question that every podcaster's ever asked you, but I'm going to try to phrase it a little bit differently, which is, there was a day you knew nothing about tabletop gaming. You didn't know you could grab a sheet of paper, write a bunch of stuff down, roll some dice and pretend to be somebody else. And then that day came. So I'd like to go back to the first day you just came across it.
Okay. Yes. Well, I was in a basement as
we've established.
Yes. So I'm trying to think of how old I was. I was born in Ohio.
Okay.
And I moved to Wisconsin for the 6th grade. So that's like 12 years old, right? It's 12 or 13, somewhere in there. Sure. Let's say that. I don't exactly remember, but and then that summer we drove back to Ohio to visit with friends. And so this is like, it was an interesting time because it's an interesting age. A lot of growing up happens over that year when you're, going between 11 and 12 or 12 and 13 or whatever. It was vaguely traumatic for me. Like, I didn't expect to move. It wasn't like, it was a
relatively
decent move. Yeah. Like it was a good move for the family and everything. But yeah, moving's not necessarily easy. Although, like, I got addicted to it. Later on, I just couldn't stop. But at this point, I went back to visit some friends, and we had a friend of mine from the neighborhood, and then another friend of mine who was from like a neighborhood over, who this guy, he was important because he had an older brother. And
always key.
Yeah. So he was the vector to like heavy metal, like VHS copies of V. I don't know if you remember the V. Yeah.
When it was broadcasting live, I remember it.
Yeah. Just like all sorts of forbidden stuff, right? Like and all the stuff that we just wanted, like, and
rated R movies.
Yeah. So I was at my friend's house. The friend in the neighborhood who had a basement apartment, like his bedroom was the basement. I shouldn't say apartment. He was a 12-year-old kid. But his bedroom was in the basement, and they had a finished basement. And I remember being down there, and my friend Matt shows up. And first of all, here's a little, well, I'm gonna share some like 30, 40-year-old embarrassment here.
Okay.
Because there's a shift, right? Like we're about to play pretend, right? We know this. The setup is that I'm going to play a role-playing game. However, I'm coming from an age where we played pretend with like stuffed animals.
Yep.
And I brought stuffed animals because that's what we played with. Like that was the thing. And like we played, like we cut them open and do surgery on them and stuff like that. But still, so I'm there with my stuffed animal, and my friend Matt, whose older brother isn't there, but is like the source of everything that's cool, deeply embarrassed. And Matt brings out TSR's Conan, right? TSR had a Conan role-playing game in the mid 80s. And we sat down and we made characters for that game, and we never played near as I can remember.
Right.
I think we just made characters. We just kind of learned about how everything works but that moment, the making of the characters and just thinking we're going to be these you know, like this is the story we're going to tell. This is the story we're going to tell. And we're going to do it through these rules, right? Like these guidelines. Yeah. I don't even know what it is about the rules that's important, but I could feel it, right? Like there was something in it that blew my mind. Left the next day, car ride back. We're in this van, this candy apple red van, Ford, driving from Ohio to Wisconsin. I'm in one of the seats, and my brother is sitting there with me. He's my younger brother, 2 years younger than me at the time. And I have a notebook that I've opened up, and I just started making rules and forcing him to play my adventure, where he's like he's a knight on a quest of some sort. And when he has to do something, he has to guess the number I'm thinking of. And it doesn't matter what number I'm thinking of. I'm going to decide whether or not he succeeds. And I mean, it was a horrible.
You had Quantum Ogre figured out at a very young age.
Yeah. I'm sure it was like an atrocious game. I bet you it was not even that great of an experience for my brother, but like, that was it. That like, that's all I wanted to do at that point. And what's interesting, well, sorry, that is just a phatic change from one part of the topic to the other. I don't know if it's actually interesting, but when we got back to Wisconsin, I was like, I'm going to need to get a role-playing game. And I knew of one, right? I knew of the Conan one, but like everyone knows D&D. So I was like, I was going to go get D&D. And I went and I picked up, I went to a comic store, and they had this 2 box sets available, the basic and the expert set. And I sat there in front of me, like I skipped. My mom had given me, I had some money of my own, and my mom had given me some money for like McDonald's or something like that. And I decided to skip the meal, so I had enough money to buy one of these. And I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking to myself, well, You've made characters, you've played a game that you made, you must be an expert. And so I bought the expert set. And that's the story of how I got first introduced to a 4-sided die and spent weeks trying to figure out how to roll that thing. I had phenomenal. No idea how to read a 4-sided die. It was like, I mean, we had a lot of fun trying to make up rules based on what we had, but it was a while before I had a proper rule book and a game to run. But yeah, then
what's funny about that for me, and I've had this conversation with a couple old farts like you and me, and it's hard for some people to completely relate to it who come from a different generation, but like we were little cells all over the country. Yeah. And, and everybody just kind of played what they played the way they played it because someone's older brother taught them how to play it, or they taught themselves on the, drive home to Ohio or things like that. And it's incredible now, just the proliferation of not only exposure, but information. Like if you don't know how to do something at this point, that's a choice, right? There's everything's out there. You can learn anything, right? But it's a very unique experience, and people like, that's not how you used to play D&D. It's like, well, screw you, old man. Like nobody played, right. Two people played D&D the same way back then. So when do you think was kind of like the next signpost in your journey as far as role-playing games? Was there another time where it had an impact, or you come across a game that maybe isn't D&D where you felt like your third eye opened? Or
I mean, there's probably plenty of times. I had another friend from Ohio who he got into them as well, and that became like a big like connection between us. We would make role-playing games together whenever we, went to visit, and like kind of along the same lines that you were saying here, like correspondence at that time was like, even a long distance phone call cost money. So you would either like write them a letter, or you would just see them once a year for a weekend or something like that. You had to fit as much as you could into it. So we would like just spend like an entire weekend together, staying up all night trying to write a game. I also remember I think I did a thread on this on Twitter like a month or two ago about the strange places you would have to go to get role-playing games. Like you get them at hobby shops, right, which were otherwise like model trains and model cars.
There was no Magic the Gathering, so they were far and few between.
Yeah. And like there was a cigar shop that we would go to all the time. There, Walden Books was great because you can go into any mall and there'd be a Walden Books, and it's somewhere in that Walden Books there would be some role-playing games. And I'm sure, like, you know, nowadays the similar experience. I know Barnes and Noble has a bunch now, and so I don't want to say like this was unique or whatever, but you couldn't seek out the one you wanted. You happened upon them. I remember poring over Dragon magazine and looking at the ads and just trying to figure out what these games, like I remember looking at, there was an ad for probably Champions, might have been Vigilantes and Villains and Vigilantes, one of the early precursors to the hero system.
Right.
And they had a picture of their character sheet. And like, what a treasure, like to just offer that up. So I would just spend like with all the abbreviations and everything. And I was like, what does con mean? Probably con, you know, like what is, you know, you're trying to figure out all these different, like how do they build these powers? Like what's going on?
How would I fill it out?
Yeah. So you kind of spend like a long time just dreaming about games. Yep. Like you can't sate that, the cycle isn't as swift as it is today, I guess is. But somewhere around high school, we got into some like fairly regular gaming. I got a lot of gaming in high school. We board games and everything. Like we had a whole group of friends. I had a GURPS Supers game.
Nice.
In the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, where on Saturday, like 5 or 6 of my friends would show up and we'd play. And then on Sunday, a different group of 5 or 6 friends would show up and we would play superheroes, experiencing the exact same day that happened on Saturday on Sunday. God. And you could go, but you couldn't go to the same, like you can't play twice in the same weekend. Right. But you could switch between which group you were in. I just had to know before that week.
Oh,
so you would
cool.
tell me. At the age of, who knows, like 18, 17, I burnt out like you wouldn't believe on that because it just, I mean, like it was just so much effort to keep everything wrangled and going. Yeah. But like that, but that definitely was like, that's one of those things, those campaigns that you dreamed about when you were a kid.
Right.
And I got to put that notch in my belt, right? Like I got to say, yeah, we did that.
Now, at any point, Eppy, did you take a break? Was there a downtime where you left the hobby? And when was that and what brought you back?
Yeah, well, I guess this is probably a little embarrassing as well. So go to college. My first attempt at college is all sorts of embarrassing. I ended up with I was not prepared for college when I first went, and I ended up with like a 0.0 semester. They kicked me out. Good news is, spoiler alert, I learned my lessons. It took me a little while. I went back, got my degree, nice. Blah, blah, blah. But going to college, at some point, there was this thing where my first degree is in English with an emphasis in creative writing. And at the time, there was considerable pressure. I don't think I would have described it at the time as pressure or anything like that, but like there's considerable pressure to just be kind of a lit fic author, right? Like none of the teachers, they would say at the beginning of their semester and say, don't do any genre fiction. It's fine if you do genre fiction. I'm just not equipped to grade that. I'm not equipped to, and it's like, you should be like, or yeah, right. Somebody here should be, right? Like this is, it's like, anyways, we can go into that whole thing, but that's neither here nor there.
I'm with you though.
Yeah. So I swallow a bit of the Kool-Aid, and I think to myself, I got to get serious about writing. And so I started focusing on lit fic, which is fine. There's plenty of great, I found some of my favorite authors that way. And at some point I was like, this is who I am now. And then I don't actually know what broke that, because in and amongst all of that, Nat, who is one of the co-authors of Dread, like, I met him when I first went to college, and then when I went back, I was roommates with him.
That's
so
funny.
And we gamed all the time. So there was like somewhere, but there was definitely this point in between there where I was like, I'm going to be
serious person.
Serious. Yeah. A serious person, a serious artist. And I had to deprogram myself a little bit over the years. I had to rediscover the stuff that I enjoyed in my youth and get back to that, which I'm happy to say worked.
Yeah. Was the gap long enough that you saw a lot change as far as the types of games that were out there and the type of systems that were out there, or was it not that long of a break?
It wasn't. I don't think it would have been that long. Well, okay, so for me, my understanding. Okay, so I was working in a comic shop in the 90s, early 90s, and then. Yeah, my gap would have been in the late 90s. And I don't want to say nothing happened in the late 90s or anything like that, but like there's a lot of good stuff, a lot of, interesting things that happen leading up to that. And then the year 2000, which is kind of like where I feel like I came back to the surface of it all, is like D&D 3rd edition dropped, a lot of indie games. Like the technology changed and made it easier for people to, self-publish things. I mean, that was the other thing. And this is, again, part of my, I'm going to put quotes around education. I mean, it wasn't education, but they were very, very vehement about self-publishing being bad. And they weren't wrong based on like there are a lot of predatory people out there who are like, oh, you want to be an author, just pay us this amount of money and we'll publish these books. We'll print these books and you can store them. And, that was like there's a trend of cannibalism in the creative writing field that like my teachers were very correct in attempting to like protect us from.
Yeah.
However, the way of the future for role-playing games was 100% self-publishing, and it had always been, right? Like it's not a
it's literally how it started.
Yeah. And so I had to, I mentioned Nat, he had to convince me that it was okay to publish a game, which was weird because, wanted to publish a game for like most of my life, right? Like that I'm was inventing them and writing them down, printing them out on dot matrix printers and stapling them together and hoping for the best. But yeah.
All right. So you and I very similar in age. I can tell just by the stories you're telling and the dates you're throwing out there. But both Eppy and I are, early 30s, mid 30s.
Yeah, sure.
But there's a difference between you and me, right? So we both had very similar gaming experiences. I too created notebooks of TSR superheroes from the old yellow box, right? Just like unbelievable amounts, drew the pictures and everything, right? And I was the forever GM as the kid in the neighborhood. I ran whatever games we ended up buying, but I never made a game. Right now, I did some creating, obviously.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's different. You did. And I'd like to get a sense of what now as an adult looking back on it. You may not know what the hell you were doing as a kid then. Do you have a sense of what was that, like that drive, or what brought you to that space?
Yeah, it's a thing that I examine and re-examine from time to time, because there's a desire to pick apart what's happening, right? But you do that anyways. Like when you read, if you're into a game because you think the rules are neat, right? Like there's a lot of different reasons to be into a game. None of them are wrong, and I'm not here to. A younger Eppy would be angry about some of these, but like a younger Eppy was also
kind of a
he
prick.
wasn't the best person. Yeah. He was, but I definitely appreciate a good rule set. Like there's I love a good turn of phrase in like fiction. It took me a long time to figure out how to express what I like in the art that I like, but there's a certain thing I like about art. The closer a band sounds to Black Sabbath, the more I like them. I mean, like I have like tastes, and one of these tastes is that this is about rules in role-playing games. I find a poetry in how the rules work, and I find a poetry in how the rules work whether or not they work. Right?
Interesting.
Because I can enjoy a game by reading it. Like, I could read a game and go, I really like what they're getting at here, right? And then I could play it and be like, oh, there's this linchpin that's missing. I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out. It's not quite working. But it doesn't matter. Like, I still like the game, right? Like, and then there's other games. And
you found joy in reading it, right? Which
exactly,
is like, that's okay too.
Yeah. And there's other games where like maybe I didn't think much of them. We played them and I was like, okay, hold on. This is doing something I wasn't expecting. And this is good. And there's games that really like from the get-go, I'm like, this is something I'm going to enjoy. Let me tell you why I think it's going to work. And then we play it, and like I'm like, just pay attention to these things that I'm telling you about, right. and we can enjoy it, and we do. And like, I'm not saying that like listen to old Grandpa Eppy, he'll tell you how to enjoy a game.
But you've read a bunch of books, you know the language, yeah.
So there's that. There's just a desire to kind of take it apart and see what it is. I will say, like, most of the time, what drives me forward is when a game inspires me and feels incomplete in some way.
Oh, right? That's interesting. Yeah.
Right. So I think there's a thing about earworms that are kind of like that. Like one of the reasons why those work is that like, if you just do part of the song, your brain is constantly trying to answer that. And I think that on a little grander scale time wise, that's sort of what happens in my head. Well, I'll play a game and a lot of my games are answers to games that I deeply love that I want to fix. And I don't like using the term fix because the games obviously are doing something and they're working, but like there's something that I want to like extract from it and purify and then place in a different setting or different settings. Setting already has a meaning in role-playing games. Just place it in a different capsule, in a different
well, let's be honest. You know this, based on your college background. I mean, so much art has been created as responses, right? That's a classic. Whether it be visual arts, whether it be literature, whatever, responses has driven some of the most incredible creativity in music too. So that's interesting. I guess I've never thought about that like quite in that context, but that makes a ton of sense. So, guys, the Insider Insight series is my opportunity to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try and understand their process, inspiration, and methods for crafting their creations. And that's exactly what we're going to do with Eppy. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and talk about a little game called Swords Without Master. We'll be right back. Hey, it's me. I'm interrupting this episode, and I hope you're enjoying it, and I bet you're anxious to hear the rest. But before we jump back, I need a favor. Do you know someone who might enjoy this episode? Can you shoot them a quick message or maybe even send them a link to it? Listeners sharing this podcast was the primary reason we almost doubled our audience last year. Also, would you like to see and hear these games in action? Go to the Third Floor Wars YouTube channel and Twitch stream. Our actual plays combine compelling role-playing, character-driven action, and system tutorials. We create great stories while lifting the hood and showcasing the game mechanics. Links to both are in the show notes. Okay, last thing, and I mean it. Have you rated this podcast on your pod platform yet? Maybe even written a short review? It is a simple way for you to be even more awesome than you already are. Okay, now I'm done. Let's jump back and listen to the rest of this episode. All right, so for those of you, and so I got to make it. Oh, hold on, I got a confession time. You did a little confession in the first segment. It's time for me to do a confession.
Sounds good.
I didn't put. There was two different people that I didn't know were the same person, and
I've done it.
Right. I didn't realize Swords Without Master guy was also Dread guy.
Yeah.
So when you got the email from me, I'm like, whoa, wait a second. I'm like, oh shit, this is exciting. So for those of you who don't know Swords Without Master is a game of adventure, violence, and wonder. Become rogues in a world of swords and sorcery, living by your wits and prowess, plunging into the unknown and seizing it from untold treasures. Now, I know a little bit about the game, but there might be people that aren't familiar with it, Eppy. And how do I word this? There's people listening right now going, Jesus, another fantasy game?
Right.
So I want to go backwards. And I want to go to Swords Without Master doesn't exist. And where did the itch first appear? Did it first appear from a mechanical standpoint, from a genre standpoint, from a response to something? Like, where was the very beginning if we look at the first exhibit in the Swords Without Master Museum?
Well, I think this is good that we had the discussion we just had, because this is the lead up to it. So I had that dark period where Litfic, right? Like that. I had that dark period where they were like, you must be a serious writer if you're going to be a writer, you know. And I mean, I'm mischaracterizing them. It's not them. It's just the whole structure.
Right. Yeah, it's the monolith. Yeah.
There's during that time, after that time, I had a period of rediscovery, right? Like where I was like, let me go back and check out those old things, the old fantasy stuff I enjoyed as a kid, and reread a bunch of the Moorcock's Elric stuff.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. Saw things like it's there's a certain joy to a work that hits one way when you're a teenager and hits a completely different way when you're an adult, right?
Yep.
And those were great for it. Like they were very, again, Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, the Fritz Leiber stuff, especially like the first four early books. And to readers who've not experienced the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stuff, when I say the first four books, please don't think of like Game of Thrones or anything like that. They're collections of short stories. They're like, grab them in whatever order you want. That's fine.
There's no first four books of Conan.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And like the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, like as a teenager, like these two rogues, their whole like adventuring career really gets going when, it's the classic, misogynistic trope of fridging the girlfriend. Like both of them were in love with women. These women were killed by the Thieves Guild. So they're no spoilers, but like they take it to the Thieves Guild, and it's why you know what a Thieves Guild is. Like the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories seep into the D&D, which seeps into like, into popular culture, really is what it is. D&D is that funnel into popular culture. So, reading it as a kid, I felt very deeply these emotions that they had. And reading it as an adult, I realized that Fritz Leiber is making fun of these two idiots.
Exactly.
Like, it's so good. It's so fun. Yeah. And it loosened things up for me, right? Like there's this, I can appreciate the genre, not from an ironic distance, but like within the genre itself, like Fritz Leiber is we call it sword and sorcery because Michael Moorcock was like, hey, what do we call this genre that we and Robert E. Tower have been doing that isn't Lord of the Rings?
Yep.
I want to call it this. And Fritz Leiber's like, oh, I've been calling that sword and sorcery. And that's why we call it sword and sorcery, right? Like, and then finding ones that I remember the covers from when I was a kid, but I never read them. Like they were in that section of the library, that wonderful section of the library. Tanith Lee, great. Like a friend of mine who people probably know, Vincent Baker, did Apocalypse World and whatnot, was like, hey, I'm a big Tanith Lee fan. You should check out Tanith Lee. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll check out some Tanith. And I'm like, oh, okay. Where was that my whole life? Right. Like that's, just really enjoying, the genre, sword and sorcery in particular, that section of fantasy and just the parts of fantasy that bleed in. Sword and sorcery is a really kind of wonderful genre in that it's very, very malleable. There's an alien in a Conan story. There's like, at any moment you could run into robots or Fafhrd and Grey Mouser it's not even important to the story. At some point they're crossing a lake and a sea monster comes out of the lake, and riding the sea monster is a time traveler from like modern day Germany. Why? I don't know what's happening. Like, probably an in-joke with a friend. Like that's because a lot of these are just like these writers are writing them and sometimes they're writing them for one magazine that's like, no, we don't want it. And then they rewrite it and send it to another magazine. Yep. They're like, yeah, that's great. And the first magazine's a Western and the second one is, a sword and sorcery one. Yeah. So it's very, so I got really, steeped in the genre and I was really, enjoying it. And I was frustrated. As I was saying before that, I'm going to try and be careful with my words here because I don't want to sound too terribly dismissive, but I was frustrated with the sort of underlying assumption that D&D was just how you handle sword and sorcery. Right. Because I was reading these things and I was like, this is not like I could jam these characters into D&D classes. And they do, like Fafhrd and Grey Mouser are in the original deities and demigods. Moorcock is also like Elrica Melnimbone. Oh my God. I should know how to say that. Anyways. And so they're like, yeah, this is a thief wizard fighter combo of level 27, right. Or whatever. I know that AD&D in that level didn't go up to 27 back then, but that's fine. But the point was that so I was trying to settle upon something. I wanted to do a sword and sorcery something. I wanted to make a statement about sword and sorcery in the form of a game. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have the rules for it. I was constantly writing a game and discarding it and writing a game and discarding it and writing a game and discarding it. Right. I didn't have something that fit what I was trying to say.
So do you feel like, Eppy, you had a sense of the feel and the texture, but you just couldn't quite build a house around it? I'm trying to. Yeah.
So okay. So I like to talk about this as having a compost heap in the back of my brain. Uh-huh. Right. So I'll get an idea. And sometimes that idea will be for the mechanics of a game that's in search of a setting, search of a theme, something like that. And I'll start working on it and I'll slap a theme on it and something about it isn't working right. So I throw it on the compost heap. It's not discard it. It's just going to sit there. Something might grow. And so, Tunnels and Trolls, this arguably the second role-playing game, does some things that I absolutely love. It's in many ways, I often think of what would the world be like if Tunnels and Trolls was the first one? How are our systems be different? But it also very much has a lot of similarities to D&D, not just the alliteration and whatnot.
Well, there's an argument one wouldn't be without the other, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so I would do some hacking on that, or I do some hacking on D&D, or I would do hacking on like whatever game I happened to be excited about at the time. I would start to drift away from that game and try and make this sword and sorcery thing. And nothing was doing what I want. But like, I can't say that I would be able to articulate what I wanted, right? Like I would just be dissatisfied with it.
Yep.
And okay, I'm just going to go into how I solved this problem because I didn't. What happened was there was a group of us. I had gotten together a group of friends at the time I was living in New York. And we would go out to eat together, hang out, freewheeling, that kind of thing. And oftentimes we'd have these dinners where suddenly we'd be clearing the table and, we'd have the salt over here and this. We'd start building a game. We'd have discussions about games and we start building it. And this is great, but it's also antisocial behavior because not everyone at that table is into games.
Right. So
my solution to that, and I've actually had several solutions to that problem over the years, but at that time, my solution to it was to grab this group of friends and say, hey, we have fun making games together. Why don't we try to make a game while we're like play the game while we're making it, right? Like this is a technique. And I use the word technique very loosely. This is a technique that we call play storming.
Interesting.
We know that sounds dumb. That's why we called it that. So the idea behind play storming is that there will be one person, and this doesn't quite work. Well, let's just say the idea behind play storming is that one of us would come with the smallest idea of a game, and we'd sit down and we'd start playing it and we start coming up with rules on the spot and we would try them. And the person that we call the game bearer, who's the one who brought the game, they get to say if we keep going with a rule or if we don't, or if we try out these different paths, and then they get to take away whatever they get to take away from. Nice. There's no burden on them to use any of those rules. There's no burden on them to not use any of the rules. Like it's just, it was a very open understanding. And we did this to some extent. We did this just for fun. Sometimes people actually had games that they brought to us that they wanted to like get, some juices going on. Yeah. There are a lot of games that almost went somewhere that came out of this. There's one, I'm just going to tell you the title of it. I can't tell you anything else about it because it never did anything. Tigers Riding Bears. Like, I wish... Like there's a world where that is a role playing game.
There's now a gap in the market.
Yeah, there's. So what happened with this group is that there was a convention in in fact, in the town that I'm in now in Western Massachusetts called JiffyCon. I'd never been. A friend of mine wanted to go and bring us, and we were like, yeah, this sounds like fun. This is. A small group of about 30 people, most of them game designers, and they're often just trying out games that they're doing. It was created and run by Emily Carebass, who's my wife. And this is how I meet her. This is the story of how I meet her. And it's not a coincidence that I now live in this town. Like I'm just going to put that out there. So we came up with a challenge that nobody stuck to us. Nobody held us to, nobody, like we're the idiots who decided to do this. We said, we're going to make a game from scratch, from the initial idea to publication in the week leading up to JiffyCon.
Okay.
And we got together and for the first game, I think there were like 3 or 4 of us doing it. I think 3 of us. That game, it's out there on one of my websites. It's called Trial and Terror, Supernatural Victims Unit. Nice. And it's a Law and Order. It's fun. It's like it's got some really neat mechanics in it. You play for like a certain amount of time as these cops in a world where there's a whole bunch of supernatural things. And then you switch to the DAs and you get to make up rules because like laws. I'm sorry. You get to make up laws because like, who knows what the world accepts that there are vampires, but what does that mean then? Like, how do we, regulate that? Anyways. We made that game and we published it and it was fun. It was a lot of fun making the game. It was stressful putting it together, publishing it and bringing it, but we had a lot of fun. The next JiffyCon we went to, actually, I think I've been to JiffyCon once before we did. I don't remember. Anyways, I'm old. The next JiffyCon we went to that we decided to do this, we made a game called Monkey Dome. And Monkey Dome came from an idea a friend of mine had, a friend of ours, who we were talking about Beyond Thunderdome, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. And we were talking about how the tone of that movie would vary so wildly from zany to grim, right? Like the example that we would use was that, like, if somebody picked up a shovel, you didn't know if they were going to hit someone and you were going to hear like a or if they were going to just blood, stick it right into their neck, you know, like you don't know what's going to happen. So that with that kernel of that idea, that became Monkey Dome. Monkey Dome was basically Thunderdome, where you rolled 2 dice. One was your zany die, one was your grim die. Whichever one's higher is what the tone was for your scene. You rolled before you did the scene, right? So you knew what it was going to be. If you rolled a tie, you would have to learn a lesson, and which means you were going to be one tone, but you should have been the other, or something like that, right? And you had to write these lessons down, and if you got a certain number of lessons, that brought us to the end of the game. And there were a bunch of other mechanics in it, like not like a ton, but there were, you know, enough. This game, we were so excited while we were playing it, and then like we kept playing it even when we were supposed to be taking time writing it, you know, and like you spent the whole week writing it and doing the layout and arguing about like art and just like everything that, you know, a week's worth of game publishing is just, I don't recommend it, but like we did it. And we got this game done, and we went to like a Kinko's or a Staples or something and printed out a bunch of them. And we had them, we're holding boxes of them. We're on a train heading from New York to Western Massachusetts for this convention. And we're on this train and we're just sitting there going, you want to play Monkey Dome? Like, yeah, I want to play some Monkey. We're so addicted to this really. And then
so what was connecting? Let's stop right there. Like what was that driver that, like, first of all, the fact that you weren't sick and goddamn tired of that game is the miracle to this story. You guys are on this train and you're like, you know, like heroin addicts going like, hey, you want to take a hit like real quick? Like, yeah. What was going on?
So, well, a couple of things. Like number one, Amtrak delays are legendary, so there was that. Like
we ran out of every other game and we got to Monkey Dome.
Yeah, but I think it was that's actually a good question, right? So this game becomes the perilous phase in Swords Without Master. So this becomes like roughly a third of Swords Without Master, and the thing about it. So what it is as you're playing it, nobody knows at the very beginning. Like there's no like the GM doesn't know. I don't remember what we called. I think we called him the Master Blaster. Probably called it the Master Blaster.
I would be disappointed if you didn't.
Yeah. But nobody knows what the game is going to be about. The Master Blaster has apocalyptic imagery that they, you know, throw at you. And then you know, kind of take that, and because you get some narrative control, you get to like kind of make that into whatever you want. You're not trying to form it a certain way, but you add your own enough to that, that there's no way like once the Master Blaster lets go of the dice, they don't know what the world's going to be like when it gets back to them. Right. And then they get to go again and they build on top of that. But then there's this thing where you'd roll these lessons, and the end of the game was after you got a certain number of those, you would trigger the end game where you'd have to reincorporate them. Oh, and okay. I think the big thing about this is that the end of the game ends up being this confirmation that the game was about this all along. Nobody could have known that. Nobody could have done it. Yep. But you're like, oh, wow. Like, no wonder I couldn't save, you know, Gary. That was so that I can learn that, you know, like that's the progress. So this is like, but the thing is, and this is the other element that happened was that my friend Jason Keeley, who's one of these game designers who now works for, he was until very recently was working with Paizo, and then he left for I am blanking on the name of the company. Oh, I should know it. They're like doing G.I. Joe and Transformers.
Oh,
and
Renegade
things.
Games.
Yes, yes, thank you. Yeah. Anyways, like he said, let's do, instead of doing this post-apocalypse one, because we've played that, to death in the whole week that this game has existed. Let's do a Western one. Ooh. And the tones are young and guns. And like, yes.
Right.
And he runs that for us. And that's when it clicks, right?
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of this game. I'm staring out the window of this train while we're playing the game. And I'm thinking to myself, this is how I make my sword and sorcery game. Like this is it. This is the seed that becomes Swords Without Master. So from there, there's a lot of work from that point on.
Right.
Swords takes a few years to hammer out mechanically. I add more phases, different ways to interact with it, because the Monkey Dome Perilous phase is just relentless, and it's supposed to be, right? Like but the Sword and Sorcery one, I was like, I can't have it be relentless. So there's sort of a breather thing that happens in it. You get to do like a discovery phase and learn things about the world. You get to do the rogues phase where you just go out and impress us or not, or whatever your rogue is meant to do. And I add a few more. At this point, I start calling them threads. The lessons get called morals. Then add motifs and mysteries. Mysteries are like, there has to be something supernatural or mysterious happening at this point. You've rolled the dice and that's what it says. So that's what it's going to be.
Right.
And the motifs are somebody in the game has said something that just feels incredibly sword and sorcery to you. So you write it down. And those, instead of the morals or instead of the lessons, those become the timing mechanism, because then you're not reliant on the dice.
Right.
Because we did play a game that went on and on and on because nobody learned any lessons. So, a bunch of like the tones get brought in. They're no longer zany and grim. They are now glum and jovial to match my idea was like Fafhrd. If Fafhrd's glum, Grey Mouser is jovial, and vice versa. That almost always is the way that happens. And then afterwards, it occurred to me that there's also the famous Robert E. Howard's opening to the Phoenix and the Sword, the first Conan one, where he's like, hither came Conan with his gigantic mirths and his gigantic melancholies.
Right,
and it's just,
right.
Oh, yes, perfect. So the game is more narrative. It's very explicit in the game that the challenge is to craft a compelling tale of sword and sorcery. And so that's, and the game itself sometimes gets in the way on purpose. Right. And sometimes it doesn't.
Well, is it, and help me out here, because believe it or not, you know more about this game than I do. When you say craft a sword and sorcery tale, is it crafting a sword and sorcery's tale or piecing together one looking backwards?
Right. So okay. So what's crafting?
Am I playing a story or am I discovering a story through play?
You're discovering a story through play. Got Absolutely. It. So what's happening is by the time it becomes Swords Without Master, the GM role is no longer Master Blaster, it's the Overplayer. And the Overplayer rolls for the overtone. There's some puns in there. You gotta have puns. It's a role-playing game. But the Overplayer brings like a kernel of a story, right? Like no idea of how it's going to end. Excuse me. But when I do it, I'm like, I just have a vivid opening scene. It's all I care about. Once we go through that, especially so this discovery phase in it is okay. So each phase, okay, let me take this back a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't want to explain all the rules because
no, but this is important.
Yeah, so the perilous phase, you're going back and forth. The overplayer is telling you all the bad things that are happening. There's one set of dice. They're being passed around the table. Only the person with the dice can interrupt and make something happen. Everyone can say what they're doing and they can slip and struggle, but it's only the person who rolled the dice who can overcome or succumb to what's happening. And once they do that, once they roll the dice, they can still slip and they can decide, I don't want to overcome or succumb. This is fun. Let's keep this going.
Yeah.
Like it's very explicit in the rules that like, if you don't care about the enemy, dispatch them. Like you're telling the GM, I don't care. If you do care about the enemy, you let that enemy run over you. And you invest them with glory by showing us how magnificent they are so that you can reap that glory back into you when you finally defeat them. And so you do this, you make these rolls, but whoever made the roll after they're done making the roll can decide, I want this phase to end. And if they don't, then the overplayer comes back with more bad stuff. And you have to pass the dice. You can't roll them twice in a row, but you can hold on to them while the overplayer's bringing all this bad stuff, and you can make it very uncomfortable for all your allies. That's fun. And then we just do that. And then we switch to another phase, and we don't have to switch to it. It could be the same, but anyways, those are rules. Then there's the rogues phase, and the rogues phase is where the overplayer rolls the dice, tells you where you are, blah, 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 and then makes a demand. Show us how you sink, the Emerald Fleet, and then hands you the dice. You roll the dice right away, and that tone is the tone where you show us how you sink the Emerald Fleet. And then when you're done doing that, anyone at the table can say, we're done with this phase. If no one does, then you make a demand of someone else. So you turn to your other rogue and you're like, and then I'm dragging the last of the Emerald's fleet down underwater. You hand it to your friend. You'll show me how you drag my corpse out of the icy depths, right? Like, yes, right. Let's do this. And so that goes back and forth. That's the rogues phase. Then there's the discovery phase, where all these phases open the same way, with the overplayer telling you where you are and what's happening. Very railroady. And then the overplayer hands the dice to someone, no demand. You just have to show us something about the world that your rogue is experiencing, knows about the world, is learning about the world. Someone's telling them about the world, something about the world through the experiences of your rogue. And then once you've conveyed this to us, you have to ask the overplayer a leading question about it. So you could be like, I find a glowing sword upon the ground, right? Like, yeah, that's great. It'd be like, why is it I shouldn't have picked it up? Right? Juicy. And so this discovery phase, there's no need for you to keep with any of the story.
Right.
Like you're certainly welcome to pick up where the last person left off, but we can jump forward and backwards in time, just like you can in a book. There's no problem. You're like, I can't think of anything to add to the story, so let me just tell you about these hobbits that live over here. Well, please, no hobbits, but like something that, like this group of people that live over here, just for the sake of selling you whatever. The only person who can end the discovery phase is the overplayer.
Okay.
Because what's happening is that the overplayer is making the notes, right? Like storing it in the old kidneys and thinking, okay, where do we go from? What is this story about? Like, what do we? And the players are writing it for them. Like they're writing the adventure, and it's so. Anyways, that's. I don't know why I went off on talking about the discovery phase, except that I think this gets to a little bit of what, like you were saying, like you don't know, nobody knows where you're going to go.
Yep.
And then you do this reincorporation in the end, and you do a little reincorporation along the way too. There's like, but like bringing it back together at the end, you're like, oh, That's what it was about. Like,
there's a lot. I'm sorry, Eppy. There's a lot of this that's familiar, right? But a lot that's very different. And you also have to remember the context of when it comes out too, because there's ideas here that were built off of in other games, right? You know, and so on and so forth. But I would imagine, and you tell me if I'm right here, that it's one thing for me to sit down with Eppy and his buddies. We take a train ride. And you say, hey, Craig, like, check this out, right? I'm going to teach you this game real quick. And we all play it together, right? And maybe you're a player, maybe you're the overlord or whatever, or overlord? Overplayer, sorry. But what happens when it's all written down? Right. And it's put into an envelope and shipped off to a foreign land, like, Florida, and you're not there. And have echoes come back to you where people have tried to wrap their head around this game or have done things with this game where you weren't there to help? You weren't there to say, yeah, that's, I'm trying to get a sense of what it's like when it got out in the wild.
Yeah. So it's a tough one, right? Like, it is definitely a departure. It's not like you don't have stats in any traditional sense. You're playing, I keep using the term rogue as if everyone knows what I'm talking about. It's not the D&D rogue. It's the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. Right. The term rogue in Swords Without Master means you're playing someone who is neither owns land nor is visibly employed, right? Yeah. Like you're
an adventurer in quotes.
You're an adventurer. Yeah. So there's a lot of concepts in it, some of which like hear pretty closely to pop culture understanding of sword and sorcery, but have their own, like, it's important that you pay attention to how they aren't exactly what this stuff is saying. I try to be very explicit. Like one of my, like I said, it took a couple of years to hammer out what the rules were. And then it took 5 years to hammer out the voice of the game.
Interesting.
And that was I just kept rewriting it. Not the whole game, but I would just start writing it and just hating it and writing it and hating it. I mean, like this is the joke, right? I couldn't figure out how to publish that game. So instead I founded a sword and sorcery magazine. So I had an excuse to publish it. I came at this the worst possible way. So that's the origin.
You wanted to write Dwarven and Elven languages, so you decided to write a book trilogy.
yeah, exactly. So that's where Worlds Without Master comes from, right?
So cool.
Worlds Without Master. Well, there's a couple places where that came from. There's that. I'm working on this, and I'm also just having fun writing my own sword and sorcery stuff. Amongst my circle of friends, there's kind of a sword and sorcery renaissance. We're very much enjoying it, and Vincent's writing a bunch of sword and sorcery short stories, and several of them end up in Worlds Without Master. I thought to myself, like, I really want, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Dragon Magazine. Like I have this like desire to recreate this thing. And then Patreon is launched, and Patreon is a model that I could see funding a magazine through. It's a possibility. And then I get surgery. I had a hernia, and they put me on painkillers. And sometime in that haze, I launch a magazine.
It's the 60s all over again.
Yeah. So that's where that came from. And so Worlds Without Master was me creating a body of work to point people to for, like, I don't want to define sword and sorcery for anyone. Right. Yeah. I spent a lot of time over coffee and stronger drinks arguing about what it is in person. I didn't want to get on the internet and argue about it. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to, here's a magazine where I have control over what's published in it. I get to, have this say about what
you get to make a statement.
Yeah, I can make the statement, and I don't have to make it explicit. I could just, do it. And so, and I got some, I'm like, I have some stories in me. I want to get them out. So there's 11 issues of Worlds Without Master. I'm not saying there's only going to be 11 issues. There was just 11 issues in that first run before I ended up, other things in life taking over. But I have a short story in each one of them. There is a role-playing game in each one of them, except one has a supplement for the role-playing in the game in the first one. So there's 10 distinct role-playing games in them. Issue number 3 has Swords Without Master in it. Right. And that's the only way to get Swords Without Master is in issue number 3. We'll probably get into this later because issue number 2 has the original wolf spell in it. So there's a lot going on here. But writing the stories for this magazine helped me find the voice that I wanted, and writing the games that I was putting in the magazine, because I wanted to, like, I couldn't. You don't have room. I was doing very stringent word counts for people because I wanted to make sure I was paying them well enough, and I couldn't afford over a certain amount. The only person who was allowed to break the word count was me, because I could rip my own self off. That's legal. And I certainly blew through that word count with Swords. Swords is anyway, I don't remember how many pages, but anyways, it's considerably more. Yeah. But I was learning as I was writing these games. I was learning how to, and then I wanted to write a series of shorter games that dealt with each little section of Swords, like how each of the phases work. And in fact, one of them did end up in another issue. It's Sorceress Bloody Sorceress, which is a murder mystery game where you play. You're doing the rogues phase over and over again, and you're basically a bunch of people at a last meal for a boy who has been named king, and he's going to be poisoned during this meal, and you're just throwing accusations like, show us about the time you insulted the king's son, or whatever. Yeah. And at some point, the boy, the kingling is what we call it. The kingling dies, and then the doors blow open and the sorceress arrives, and she's going to solve this mystery. Anyway, that's a whole nother game. I don't want to get on to it.
But I want to pause for just a second if we could, because there's a term you keep using, which I think everybody, including myself listening, thinks we understand. And I want to make sure we do. And that is the idea of you struggling with the voice of the game, and different games have different voices. Can you give us an understanding or an example of that? Maybe using 2 games real quick. So 2 games that that came from you, but have two different voices. So let's start off with Swords. What is where did you settle? How would you characterize the voice of Swords?
Yeah, let's see if I can do this aloud. I'm going to read aloud to you the opening of Swords, because I think it's just going to take me one moment, because
beauty of editing, baby.
Yeah. I've got a hard drive so organized. All right, here we are. Let's bring up Worlds Without Master issue 3. Gather writing implements, scraps of paper, 3 or 4 of your cohorts, and 2 6-sided dice that you can easily tell apart to a table. A mahogany table adorned with thick, greasy candles and 5 human skulls. Failing that, a stout oaken table near a glowing hearth, replete with ale-filled steins and a succulent roast. Or, if you prefer, a table chipped whole from a single obsidian stone, placed on the back of a coiled serpent of silver in a high room in a lonely tower shrouded by a prismatic fog. That's how I open up Swords.
Right.
And I was like, I wanted to say, we're having fun here, right? Like I want to, like, it's not like that's not the case.
You're not being completely serious, right? But your tone setting.
Yeah. But also, like, all 3 of those tables, I mean, you want to play at all 3 of those tables, right? Like each one of them says something, and the game itself is all about that, like finding the detail that's going to make the scene work, that the rest of your players are going to go, oh yeah, like I didn't like you start describing the mahogany table, and they're like, yeah, mahogany table, like, greasy candles on human skulls, and they're like, and they're writing that down in the motif, right? Like that's they're putting that. And I didn't have room I certainly had room for fiction because I filled the whole magazine with fiction, right? Like, and all of that fiction is like, I felt like a nice introduction to what I want out of this game, but I didn't have room to kind of talk you through it. So I had to put it in how it's presented to you, right? Like, and I want it that like to tightly pack that. Whereas like a counterexample would be the Dread, which was the first one that I did, where I mean, I will admit, it was the first game I wrote. Like, the rules to Dread fit on the front and back of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And it's a 200-page book. And that, first of all, should say some things. And there's plenty of good material in that book, I hope. A lot of stuff to help you build the horror atmosphere. Like, the other thing that sort of is going on in my design here is Swords. I'm spending a lot of time talking about how the overplayer just comes with a vivid image, and then we go from there. And they can kind of sit back. It's because at this point, I've demoed thousands of games, right? Like, this is me. Like, the next game I write is going to be easier for me to, at every single step of the way. It's like, it's easier for the overplayer. It's going to be easier for the game master, whoever that is. Because Dread's not, it's not that you can't do it. This is actually kind of a super important thing in role playing, is that we need people who are interested in game mastering to understand they're capable of it. Yes. And like, a lot of people, it's just the fear, or they just don't feel that, like, they read it and they're like, I think I know what the rules are, but I don't know if I can run it. I'm like, you can run it. You already know more than most. Yeah.
So what can you give me a sense of previous voices that you put to Swords that you threw away? So what were some other angles you shot at Swords and missed?
I get over serious. There's definitely that. Like, there's some of them where I was just more so than what this is. A lot of them, they're just so constantly going back and forth between those scales, like the over serious and the under serious, because I want to say, like, this happens a lot with a lot of genre fiction where there's people who are in the genre who enjoy it and know what's going on. And there's the people who are genre adjacent and enjoy it from that point of view and think we need to deconstruct this genre. And then they go and do a thing that's already a fundamental part of the genre, right? Like you can't deconstruct genres. They've already done it. Like, you can't stand outside of a genre and come up with an idea that someone inside the genre hasn't already understood about their own genre and done a seminal work in it, right? Like, that's just, and I'm sure there's counterexamples to what I'm saying here, but there's certainly many, many examples that say otherwise.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to be too snotty. I don't want to come off as
you're not, though. You're not. You're being very explicit in explaining this. So you're not coming off that way at all. So please.
Okay.
I'll tell you if you're being an asshole. Don't worry.
I appreciate that. So there's that fine tuning of that voice, right? Going from like over serious to being too silly, too dismissive or whatever. But there's also there's also like, okay, do I want to make sure that people are doing like very little wizardry, because you're open, you're right. Like you're, and I have played games where like by the end people are like, we need to restart the sun. If we don't do that, and those, those have been a lot of fun. And I've played games that have been like incredibly understated compared to that. Like, I mean, anything can be incredibly understated compared to that. But I was trying to figure out like, okay, how do I convey like the proper level? Because there's no mechanics pushing in and saying, well, you can only get this far. You can only go that far. And I also want to leave some of that open, but also how do you negotiate that? So there's a lot of that going on. I mean, I think that like largely that's like, so you have, when you get a game, right, there's a lot that comes with that, including the art, a lot of like some fiction written in between the chapters, or, you know, whatever, and down to like the form of the book. I mean, I'm a big fan of weird forms. And like you earlier in this conversation, you were like the Marvel superhero, and then you said Yellow Box, and I was like, yes, right. Like, I mean, I've got both of them, but like, it's a different feel. It's different, and like part of that is just that box, right? Yep. Like, you know, like it's not that the rules are that greatly different, but like, yeah, the Yellow Box. Now we're talking.
And by saying Yellow Box, I mark it in time, right? I mark it in. I mark it in exposure. You know how long I was involved in TSR's Marvel, because I'm talking Yellow Box, not Blue Box, right? Yeah. But it's amazing, though. It's amazing, and now, you know, it sets the tone, and in itself, it's very interesting, man. Yeah.
So there's a lot that goes in there, and when you're an independent game designer, right? And so you're doing so many different jobs, and it's not that I couldn't rely on artists. I had a lot of great artists. One of the great joys of publishing Worlds is getting to know a bunch of artists and just like being able to pay them for their gorgeous art, becoming friends with quite a few of them, you know, and just, but there's just this thing where it's like, there's a thing in my head and I want to get it out. The tools I have the most direct control over are the rules that are presented on the page, how they're presented on the page, the words with which I use to present them. And then like this, what we're doing here, where I get to tell somebody about it and be enthusiastic. So there's definitely like and like when I did Dread, that was not in my head. Like that, all of that wasn't in my head. What was in my head was, this is what a role-playing game looks like on a shelf. How do we make it look like people expect a role-playing game to look like, but different enough that they think they're going to get something new out of it. So, you know, like that's a different set of concerns. It took a while to resolve as well, but like,
So going back though a little bit, what bounced back to you that surprised you, right? So was there stories you heard about people playing swords or people grokking swords that you're like, oh, okay, I didn't see that. What surprised you?
Yeah. So it definitely, I will say that like in the beginning there's a problem with Patreon, if I may. There's a problem with
Patrons you can turn out, right? You can tune out right now. Patreon's fine. Go ahead.
No. What I'm saying is this. Maybe you experienced this. Maybe you understand what is where you put something out and crickets, right? Like it's not like a Kickstarter where there's fanfare and a celebration right up to the end, and like the price rockets towards the end because everyone's worried about not getting it. The FOMO hits really hard. That Patreon doesn't have it. So I did a dumb thing. I will admit this. Like I told almost no one that it was going to be an issue 3, right? It was a game that people knew about, that was supposed to be out, you know, like not supposed to be out because there was a Kickstarter or anything, but like I said, oh, I'll have this out by November, like 3 years earlier, 4 or 5 years earlier. I don't remember. I remember when it came out, somebody was like, hey, I've got this coupon that I got from you at Gen Con for so much off of it when it finally comes out. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. There you go. Enjoy. But so I'm, you know, waiting for it to make a ripple. And I put it out there, and I put it like probably around midnight. I don't know. I just like at the very end of the day,
very strategic,
put it out there, and then just like emotional wreck probably for the rest of the week, because there's just nothing. Nobody's talking about it. And then people start talking about it. And then it's like, they're like, wait a minute. But there's definitely like, it's not going to work for everyone, especially like reading it off the page. I think it's definitely a game that people, when they've played it, they're like, oh, I get it now. And it's because I think I'm not in the best position to determine this, but I think it's because because it is different enough from other role-playing games that they're just not figuring out what slot to fit it in their head, right? Like, but there were people out there who did get it right away, and they did some.
And what did they say about it? Was it all of it anticipated? So they came back to you and say, "Eppy, this is great." You're like, "Yeah, I was waiting for everybody to find that."
Yeah.
Or did somebody come back and say, "This was really interesting to me," and you're like, "Oh shit, I didn't really piece that together." Like, what surprised you?
Oh yes. No, there's definitely there are people that got lessons from it that like. I get to see it. Like there are a few games that people made that are based on it out there. The second edition of With Great Power is a superhero version of it. There's I'm gonna get myself in trouble by not listing all of them. There's not as many as Apocalypse World, certainly, but like
okay.
we can't all compare ourselves to yeah. But there's a handful of them, and they're really neat. And seeing like where they go with the mechanics and what they decide to do with it is often a very interesting thing. And also the thing that happens that is really gratifying to me, and this is just pure ego stroking, but there'd be like somebody who's like, I was hacking at it, and I was trying to turn this into this, and then I finally discovered that you couldn't, and I was like, yeah. Like,
did you see my footprints along the way?
Yeah, that doesn't work. I know. Like, I don't. We tried.
Oh, that's fun.
But yeah, I'm trying to think of like, Evan Turner, who is a friend of mine. I know. He wrote, well, along with his wife, Kat Jones, they wrote a LARP based on it that was really awesome. And so before Swords came out, there was the City of Fire and Coin, which is let me take you by the hand and walk you through kind of adventure. Like we're going to play a Swords Without Master adventure. You don't have to make characters. Here are the characters. Here's where you would make a roll, but let's pretend you made this roll so that we can go through this part and all that. It's still out there. It's free. I don't like I wrote that before I figured out what I wanted. And so I'm not like, go to it. I actually want to go and take a look at it and redo it. And, but it's out there. They set their LARP in the City of Fire and Coin.
Oh, cool.
Which is the fantasy city for whatever it is that's there. And they had these locations. They put them in manila folders. And it was just the locations all around the city. They set them all around the room, and people would go there, and there would be a picture, a little description of what's happening. And then you play out whatever you're going to play out. And then you write something down in there to convey. I might be misrepresenting some of these rules because I'm going off of memory here, but you write something down about what happened, right? And then you flip it over, and there's this other side, same location, but it's a different tone.
Nice.
And so every time somebody visited, the tone switched, and you'd write these things down just like you do in the motif, like to say, hey, this is what happened there. And like, it was great. You just watch these people just scatter to different locations. They're like, oh, I got to find where this is or whatever that is. And making up plots because somebody would do something and write something down, and then someone would see it and be like, we got to follow that up. Like, again, no game master involvement in that. Like, people would come, and I was helping game master it, and people would come up to me, and I'd be like, well, you got to tell me what's happening because I don't know. Like, you gotta, and then, and this has nothing to do with Swords. It's just a very brilliant thing. And if you're ever running a LARP, you should do this. There was a table. We got the names. Everybody made their characters and ahead of time, and we had all of them answer a question about what is a drink from their homeland. And then we went out and we bought a whole bunch of different non-alcoholic, because we couldn't, but drinks. And then we labeled them
that's cool.
as these drinks. And we put them on a table in the middle of the room. And this was like this tavern. And people kept coming back. They would go out, they would have an adventure, come back to that tavern and relay it to everyone else. and then go off. And that's how everyone knew everything that was happening. And it was just like,
that's so cool.
You're like just so many, just a few steps away from just removing the game master and then just living that world, that life for the rest of your life, right? Like if you just have like a table, it's just like, this is our tavern table. Anyone who comes into our house, just have a drink and tell us about your adventure. Like, oh.
And it's the central node to the whole thing, which, again, is a voice in its own theme, right? And pulls that together. That's very, very cool. So, guys, we're going to take another break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about a game we've touched on a little bit, but you might be surprised. We're going to delve into it a lot deeper. We're going to talk about Dread. We'll be right back. This is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content that you're listening to right now for free. That pitchman explains by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the third floor, we refuse to interrupt your episode of Tabletop Talk with such time-wasting pleas. We pledge never to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month because supporting content creators keeps the content coming, even if there is a link in the show's description. And there is. We don't ask you to click it and become a patron. We don't waste time rambling about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting episodes without ad breaks like this, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode knowing Tabletop Talk, despite being supported by its patrons, won't engage in such blatant appeals for support. So I think the way I want to start this is similar. I'm going to ask you a similar question that I asked Jason Morningstar when he was on the show. I asked Jason, I said, are you tired of talking about Fiasco? So to you, are you tired of talking about Dread? Let's start there.
Yeah. I guess I just said, yeah. No.
Right. Have a good night.
Yeah. Good night. I mean, I'm not going to say no, but I'm not going to say yes either. Like, I have gone up and down with Dread over the years.
I bet.
It's okay. So far and away, my best selling game, especially now during the spooky seasons.
Yeah.
It is a game I poured my heart and soul into that was all but designed, like almost, I would say like 99% of it was designed 2 decades ago, right? Like it's, I think it came out in 2005.
Well, won the Ennie in 06, right? So
yeah, so like it came out in 5, and then it was up for the Ennies in 06, and so that's 17 years. Was that 17 years? I'm gonna barf.
Don't get me started on this. You want to talk about another podcast? Me talking about how time works now that I'm 50 is just not okay. It's not okay.
Yeah. Well, and so we created that game in the fall of 98.
Wow,
99,
no kidding.
Something around there. And before I'd said it would talk a little bit about like sometimes you have a mechanic and you don't have a setting or whatever, and like that was definitely a game where we're like, oh, we have a mechanic, and then, but it was only like a few heartbeats before we had the setting. I think we tried, and we didn't actually bring it to the table. We were just thinking, what kind of setting will we do with this? And then horror hit, and then we were like, oh yeah.
So let's go back to that point in time, though, if we could, real quick, Eppy. So was it a matter of you just going, like a Jenga tower could be a resolution system? Was that how it was born, or? Yeah.
So it was an attempt. Okay. So the entirety of our hobby is about creative constraint, right?
Right.
We're like affordances and constraints. You're allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. Like fighters can't shoot fireballs. Wizards can. And And people, well, of course, yeah, because like, no, I mean, there's plenty of anime where fighters shoot fireballs. Like there's like, this isn't, none of this is written in stone. We've just decided, right? So we offer these affordances and constraints. In back then, I was so much younger, so much more hot-headed. There was like a very, like, it was like too many numbers in role-playing games. Let's make a role-playing game without numbers. How do you do that? Dice have numbers on them. Let's throw dice out. Well, what about Jenga? And as it turns out, we had to do quite a bit of math to make sure, like, nobody playing the game has to, but right. I could, there's 45 blocks or 45 minutes. Oh, wait. Oh, see, now I'm going to prove myself wrong here. Hold on. 3 blocks to a level.
Right.
18 levels, right? No? Wow. So have I forgotten what all this is?
How many levels? 18? 18, 3. So it's going to be 30, 16.
16 levels, I think.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my Lord. Yeah, no, there's 48. There's 48. There's 48 blocks in the tower, 16 levels. Whew.
It's close.
Yes. We had to figure out, like, we had to do quite a bit of playing with Jenga to see, like, how many would you need to pull for it to make it realistic, and how do you make that happen? And,
yeah.
But so, I mean, the original constraint was that, like, it was like,
hey, no numbers.
No numbers. Let's see if we could do this. And I say that, but like our first version of the game had dice in it. We never played with the dice. Like we had a bigger version of the game that we brought to the table for the first play test, and immediately threw out a lot of it and just played because it just, we knew it wasn't going to work. Like, like you knew it was the moment you sat at the table, it felt bad to do anything that wasn't with dread. Yeah. Like, this is this game that, like, we, our original game had, I think the questionnaire had like about 100 questions. Everyone had the same questionnaire, and you had about 100 questions, and we sat down, and immediately everyone was like, I'm not going to answer 100 questions about my character. Right. And we're like, oh yeah, you're right. Just pick a few. Sure. And so, and that evolved into a game that where the GM comes up with the questions. And since Dread has been released, in my own personal experiences, evolved to a game where I make that player come up with a question for that player to come up with, because I need, what we were, I'm going on a huge tangent here, but like, so that was, like I said, it was like late 90s, early aughts. We were running it at conventions. I think in 2000, we had a version of the game that was like 8 pages long, that we handed out. If you ever find one, burn it. It is very obnoxious. We were just talking about voice. It is like the problem with horror games, kind of. It's not good. At least that's how I remember it. Like,
the 8 commandments come down.
yeah. And so we were running at a lot of conventions, and we would end up we would take up these convention slots, and we wanted to have a unique game for each convention slot, which is counterproductive. And I just want to say this to any aspiring game designers out here: if conventions are ever a thing again, make it the exact same scenario for every convention slot, because you want different people. Like, it's great to cultivate a group of people who will go to every single one of your things, but you don't. You depend on them reaching new people, which isn't necessarily going to happen. We had a great loyal follow. I don't want to say following. That seems dismissive.
Yeah, people that loved it.
Yeah, people that loved it, that came into the games. Like when we finally published it and it came out in 2005, somebody bought it, and I was there when they bought it because I wasn't even in the booth. We were actually selling it out of a t-shirt booth that was just agreed to sell it for us or whatever. Yeah. And somebody was like, I've been waiting to get this game for like 3 years. I play it all the time. It was just like, well, why are you buying it if you play it all the time?
That's awesome, though.
But so what was I saying? What was the point?
Well, so I'm going to pause here because there's a couple interesting things that have come up. One, you going out and doing an iteration process via these convention games, right? Where you just keep putting the game in front of people. And I'm sure you can't even help yourself. You're making tweaks and changes. It may not be from Saturday to Sunday, but it could be from the October convention to the December convention, right? Or both are happening. Was there a moment where you made an adjustment? You added something, you took something away, and that was the AD. There was before that happened, there was after that happened. So was there a landmark moment, and it might have been something small you added or took away, where like, okay, now the game's cooking with gas. Now I found Dread. We were fucking around before, and now we're just going to sand a few corners.
So, well, okay, I'm going to say no, but I have a good moment to share anyways. So like the first game of Dread, like I said, it was a group of us. We were just in our kitchen at a kitchen table playing around a candle, which is also dumb. Don't do that with a Jenga tower.
Get 10 of them.
Yes. And we threw out so many of the rules that we weren't using like right away, and we played that game, and that game was scintillating. And at the end of that, we knew
Did
like
you really?
Almost everything about that game. But,
holy cow.
But I will say this, like, then we go to these conventions and like, we knew that we had to cut down the questionnaire, and we ended up settling on 13 because that's a spooky number. And we knew, I still had to figure out like how to explain, how to run a good horror game. But we knew basically how the game was going. But I will tell you about a time that we did make up a rule on the spot that has made it into the final book. And it's kind of a pivotal rule. And it might be the fastest turnaround from, is this a rule? Yes, it is. And this is somebody was at the tower. I don't even remember the situation, but if you're familiar with Dread, they're doing something spooky's happening. They're doing something. They're pulling on a block, and they can tell, and everyone at the table can tell this. The moment they let go of this block, this tower is going down. It's just going down. And they looked me in the eye and they said, "Can I sacrifice myself by pushing it over deliberately?" And I said, "Yes." And they did it. And it was that was the boom. Like there's the rule. It happened. And so that's how the heroic sacrifice, the blaze of glory rule for Dread came from. And it was just very much like a panic. Yeah. Like I'm going to die. I want this to mean something. Please let it mean something.
That's so cool.
And I think probably at a convention we came up with like where the dead man walking thing, where if the tower falls too early, then you're alive, but at any point the host can take your life away. And then we did that because it did go down early in one game. Actually, oftentimes when it went down early in a convention, somebody just ran. That person would just run to the dealer hall and buy the game, which is very satisfying, incredibly satisfying. But we did this dead man walking thing this first time, and they just watching the other players pull out all the stops to try and keep this character alive that we have explicitly stated.
Isn't it amazing?
They're just going to die. There's nothing you can do. Yeah. They're going to die at some point. And they're like, I'm pulling. And I'm like, yeah, this is great. And then the person playing this just dove right into that and was like, I am the idiot who always wanders off. I'm the idiot, like why not get people to do, and it's just, I was like, yeah, that's great. That's
well, what you're talking about are constraints again, right? Yeah. You've added a constraint. This person is going to die. And I made a joke about the 10 candles, but I had a chance at a campsite with some friends to play 10 candles for the first time, like out in the woods. Right.
Awesome.
And it was amazing to have that constraint that starts that game, which is, nobody's walking out of this.
Yeah. This is it.
But to watch how all of me metagaming, Craig thinks about games all the time, goes into, I lost myself too, and it happens with Dread as well, where we have these constraints, but we've got this wolf inside of us that's going to make it mean something that's good. And it's it's amazing what happens. And it does. And I love board games. That doesn't happen when you play a board game.
Right.
I love miniature gaming. Doesn't happen when you play miniature gaming. It's something that's very, very unique about this, which is really, really wonderful. So you say, I'm at my kitchen table. We pull out the Jenga tower. We're saying like, there's a game here. Let's mess around. Right. And you get done with it after throwing away 99% of the rules. And you knew something was special. What were some things you saw in other people's faces though? Okay. So you've run the game more than anybody on this planet. And is there things that you saw were there mirrors that people put up to the game where you're like, and we've talked about a couple really, like the Dead Man Walking thing, the heroic pushover, times where the people playing it informed you as the designer and ended up what we play today when we go buy the book. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I might cheat a little on this.
You're allowed, and then I'll ask the question again, but go ahead.
No. It's a good question. The thing is that like, I don't, there are things I do in Dread now that I don't remember if they're in the book.
Oh, interesting.
And there have been hacks of Dread that I have written since Dread that incorporate things that I've learned along the ways running Dread over the years that I know aren't in the original Dread, but like, so, but like, I definitely have some highlight moments of like, I had a game in which this was early game, where I think it was before it was out, where it was like a Victorian, sewer mystery, one of those. Yeah. Something was happening in the sewers of Victorian London. And one of the characters, you hand out these questionnaires and you have to offer them something about the character. You don't want to fill in too many blanks because they're going to fill in them. And so you're just like, this is this. And I was like, oh, we've got a psychic here. And a psychic even to the royal family, right? And that famous. And somebody was like, I want to play that. And I'm like, okay. And I hand that psychic. And like the first question, or maybe the second question, somewhere near the top, it's like, aside from yourself, who else knows you're a fraud?
Right.
Just this wonderful, yeah, no, you're not a psychic. No one's. So this person, when they play, everyone else at the table is like, we got a psychic with us. We're going underground. We're going to go and they, at some point they come to well, I don't know where to go. I'm a little afraid of going down this. Do you know anything? And the psychic looks at me and I'm like, I'm not going to reveal any secrets. So I'm like, and they're like, I was like, do you want to have like a little GM conference? And they're like, yeah. And we go off to the side and they say, I want to pull from the tower. I know I don't have any powers. I just want to pull to convince them that I have powers. It was amazing.
That is amazing that they gave a shit, right? It's so cool.
So we go back and they pull and I'm like, yeah, you do feel something. And then we go off again to have this little conference. And then they go, and I tell them like, I got nothing for you. You're not psychic. And they're like, I know, I'll make something up. And we went back and
that's great. So now, this is great.
Yeah,
so they, when they put, who else but you're a fraud? Was it another player that knew they were a fraud, or was it you were the only two people at the table that knew?
Yeah, I don't remember who knew, but it wasn't one of the other players. So it was just the two of us.
You just made it clear to that player that you are a fraud. Oh God, that's great. That's great.
I think it ended up being like a brother or something like that, like some character, due to the background or whatever. But yeah, so like that definitely that's stuck with me for
I'm sure
a decade and a half, right? Like that's definitely been.
You told the story like it was yesterday. That's what's amazing about it. Why horror? Now, I'm saying that not for obvious reasons, but like, have you always loved horror? Do you have a relationship with horror and role playing, or was it the obvious, or was it yes, Craig, everything you just said?
It's a little bit of everything. I definitely I love horror. I do. I scare easily, and I'm okay with that. Like that's a thing that I enjoy. As a kid, I would often sit alone in a dark room just to scare myself, like to get that feeling or whatever. There were definitely things, growing up, I had I didn't get much exposure to horror movies. They were all from my friend Matt and his older brother, right?
The well-established rated R movie dealer. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was often the poster or the cover, and that was it. Like, I didn't actually see the movie or anything. I was too afraid to or whatever. And yeah, it was definitely. So I do very much love horror. There was, and it definitely fit the thing. But there's also this thing where, are you familiar with Chill?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, okay. Played so much Chill.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
And for those of you playing the home game, yes, we just dated ourselves.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm gonna place it a little like it, this would be the Mayfair copy of Chill. So this would be not the Pace Setter, which is the box set, but the Mayfair one, which is the black one with the Harlequin mask thing on the front. The art in it was just gorgeous. Like, look up Mayfair Chill art. You'll find it. And, anyways, very similar to the Pace Setter one, but less tonal wise. I think it was attempting to be more serious, right? And I played this in the 90s with my high school friends, and I was at my parents' house in the basement. We played it, and we had an old, just a like kind of industrial carpet, like no shag on it whatsoever. Not a comfortable carpet, but at least it's not concrete, right? Out on the floor, red, just a dark shade of red. And I took desk lamps and set them on the ground. And that's how we lit the whole room. It was just this red light coming up from below. And we played this game. I think it was my game was deeply influenced by the X-Files, which had just kind of come out. And but Chill has that kind of, the society for, they keep changing what it stands for, but it's save. You're trying to save the world from the unknown. And
it's got the Monster of the Week type stuff like X-Files. And
yeah. And I remember running a game. I do not recall what was going on in the game, but I remember the game being done. And at the end of the night, my friends were leaving the house and they were running to their cars. Like, it was dark out and they were just like, fuck it, I'm running. Like, I'm just gonna like I don't care about dignity. This is, and that was definitely a moment that stuck with me. That was that was powerful. Like what we were able to do there. I remember, like, when I was younger, my friends and I made really, really hokey haunted houses for other friends that just like you had a weekend and you're like, what are we going to do? I don't know. Let's make a haunted house. And but leading into Dread. So Dread comes out and before Dread is released, like while we're writing it, very much responding to horror games at the time, because I was having this problem with, my problem is that Cthulhu has hit points, right? Like that it's less scary with hit points. And that was at least, I mean, I still hold to that, but like that's, what
that's your response, right? You say, I'm struggling with this and I want to respond to it. Doesn't mean that Call of Cthulhu isn't a great game. People don't love it. And it's, who know where it'd be without it. That's not anything that you're saying. You're just saying, I got a problem with hit points.
Yeah, exactly. And so, all right. So that's what's kind of going on in my head in the late 90s, early aughts, while we're figuring out Dread. That's why I have this angry polemic, 8-page. But I'm also like, okay, I need to immerse myself in this genre, because if I'm going to write the definitive text, like, listen to me, right?
You never stopped being that lit writer, did you?
Yeah. If I'm going to do this, I need to know what I'm talking about. And so again, like, whereas with Swords, I kind of dove back into sword and sorcery before Swords came, and I was just trying to re-experience the genre. With Dread, I was like, I need to get back into like the horror stuff that I really enjoy. I need to learn and do that and expose myself to a lot of the horror that like came about when I was a kid that I wasn't allowed to watch and was like too afraid to watch. Yeah. It didn't, and so like in those early days, it's just like, like a lot of, there was one, it's not like, well, no, actually I quite like it. It's a great movie. Return of the Living Dead. When I was a kid, when that came out, there was a radio ad for it that had a clip from the movie where if you're familiar with the movie, you know the clip I'm talking about, where they have one of the dead and she's on this autopsy table, this tray, and they ask her why they want brains, and she's telling them it's to ease the pain of being dead. That broke me in a certain way. Like when I was a kid, like I was like, right? Like you just sit there thinking, wait, is being dead painful? Like we get this amount of time on Earth, and then it's pain, and the only way to ease it is to eat brains. Like that was an existential crisis for, at the age that I was. So I didn't touch that movie for years because of that. When I finally watched it, I was like, it's like the
it's like the books we were just talking about. You watch the movie twice. You see it two different times, right?
Yeah. And at that point, at some point in the early aughts is when I finally saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that remains one of my all-time favorite films.
It's an incredible movie.
And that is not a one to take lightly. Like if you are like, oh, I might be afraid, and I don't want to be afraid, then give it a pass. Give it a pass. It's okay.
Halloween is my movie for that one.
Oh yeah. Oh, we just rewatched that one recently, and there's just so much good. Yeah. Just so much good, like weird movement from Michael Myers, like where it's great. It just creeps you out. Like the way he's like kind of just investigating what it's like to kill people. And
he really is. And I've told my wife this, because my poor wife, that phrase you'll hear a lot from me, my poor wife. So I make her sit through some of these movies. I make her watch Jaws. I make her watch, Halloween. I make her watch Casablanca. I make her watch these movies, Godfather. And for her, she's 6 years younger than me. She was not the same cinemaphile that I was, right? Mm-hmm. So she just didn't watch these movies. Luckily, she's 10 times smarter than me. But like, some of them don't land.
Yeah.
And I have to, but I'm lucky because I can say to her, I'm like, yeah, but honey, there was nothing before Casablanca, right? So the reason that Casablanca seems like, well, okay, is because everything is after Casablanca. Same thing with Halloween, right? Like and I do like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But there's no Texas Chainsaw Massacre without Halloween, and that's important to understand that. So I just completely derailed what you were saying. So it's Texas.
No. It reminds me, because I didn't see Casablanca until I was an adult. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's where all of that comes from. It's like, that was like, oh, Han Solo.
Exactly.
Like, I get it. Yeah. I get it. Yeah. And,
so we're talking about your love of horror, finding Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's one of your all-time favorites.
Yes. So I was just like going down a little memory lane of enjoying horror here. Yeah. But that was basically it. Like I enjoy.
Have you found any new horror that you're really liking? I'm struggling with that, but I've found some ones that I'm just like giddy over. So what are some newer stuff that you loved?
So the most recent thing that kind of got me was, and this is not in a like, well, whatever. Like, so the other one thing about horror as a genre is that it is incredibly broad. It's again, like sword and sorcery. Yes. It can dip into anything. You'll find it overlapping in a lot of things. God, what was the name of it? Wait, it's coming to me. It's something God, Mad God. I think it's Mad God. Yes, came out last year.
Oh my God, I haven't seen
it. It is. Phil Tippett, who is a animator. It's almost done entirely. Like I have now gone. There we go. Sorry, I was looking for the tab in which this existed. It's stop motion, or almost entirely stop motion.
No kidding.
And it is. There's not like a straightforward narrative. It is just horrifying scene after horrifying scene, but it pulls into a narrative, and like it's an experience that if you're a horror fan, I recommend it. if you're like, I don't know what horror is about, like I'd like to experience horror, maybe not start there. Maybe not like, trying to think of like the stuff in most recent memory. This is already still quite, well, I mean, this is still kind of old, but Midsummer was like a big one. Yep. Midsummer, I got to say, Midsummer was offered an amazing moment for me where Endgame, right? Avengers Endgame was out. I was visiting my brother and his kids. They were, I don't know how old they were. They were young, right? And we were going to an Alamo Drafthouse movie theater to get some food and to watch Endgame. And I don't think I'd seen it yet, but they had, or their oldest had. Got it. The youngest had not, because he was a little scared because of the way the previous movie ended, right?
Fair.
So my brother and his oldest went to see Endgame. They came back. They reported, "You can see this. You won't be scared. This is this is a good one for you to watch." So, and they wanted to go with me because they know that I got these comic books, and so when I came out to visit, we decided to go. And so we're in this theater, and like, there's a couple of things that happen in this that are great. Like his oldest every time the youngest was getting scared, the oldest would be like, "Don't worry," and then tells him what's about to happen. They give you this whole warning at the beginning about like, we will kick you out for spoilers. And I'm just like, shut up.
He's saving his brother, Eppy.
Yeah, no, it was great. But there was this great moment where we're sitting there and there's trailers, and they're doing trailers, and they do a trailer for Midsommar. And
that's pretty intense for an Endgame.
What, right? And as it's going along, like it's starting off like all bright, flowery, and immediately, like, I didn't know anything about the movie. This is the first time I'd seen the trailer, and I could feel it.
You saw
like
it coming.
In the back of my head. I'm like, oh no, this is straight. This is some folk horror that's coming down the line now. I could just smell it, right? And so I'm sitting there with my younger nephews, and they're getting quieter and quieter, and as this thing's going on, and the trailer's getting more and more and more terrifying. So we get to the end of the trailer. Like, there's no jump scare or anything. I don't think there is, but it just leaves you very disturbed, which is the sensation that you're supposed to have. And I knew I had to do something to break the spell that I had on them. So I just turned to them and I said, "I'm going to watch the fuck out of that film."
Crazy Uncle Eppy.
And that was it. That's all it took. I was like,
"Oh, that's a great story, man. That's a great story." Snapped him right out of it.
Yeah, I'm like, come on, let's go.
Well, let's stay along this same thing. One thing that I love doing on this show to wrap things up is we spend so much time talking about what you make, but it's also very interesting. I'm finding out to my listeners what you consume. So, we've talked about a couple horror films, but I want to know what has gotten its hooks into you recently and hasn't let go. So is there a show that you have binged watched and couldn't stop watching, or a book series you couldn't put down, or a video game that just stole time from you recently? Like what did to you what you hope your stuff does to other people?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to put the word out there for Primal. Are you familiar with Primal?
You talking about Primal Quest or Primal the cartoon?
Primal the cartoon.
It is unbelievable. It's why I got Primal Quest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's life-changing.
Yeah. It's I'm only like, cause you said binge. I have not binged. We're at this house, we're taking our time with it because we're afraid to binge it. But that show, I was a huge fan of Samurai Jack.
Dexter was very good. He also did the Dexter's Laboratory too.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. Just good stuff. And somebody on Twitter, I do not recall who, otherwise I get whoever you are. Thank you. They were like, Primal, Eppy, I think you're going to like this. And we watched the first episode. Yeah. That first episode, it's good, but it's hard. It is. I
had to stop. I took like 2 days off.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just like, so like, I'm gonna say yes. I'm really enjoying this. However, I'm going to put some, as best as I could, content warnings here, where people die, children die, animals you fall in love with die, and it is brutal, and I that is not the point.
That's where I was headed. Exactly right. So it's not doing it for the sake of killing children and animals you love. It is some of the most powerful storytelling I've seen in a very long time. And it's done with so little.
Yeah. I mean, like the two main characters are, they're vocal, but they don't have words. They're unable to communicate that way. And, and if you're a fan of sword and sorcery, like, there's sorcery in the first season. Yeah. No swords yet. Spears. You get spears with stones. It is, and then gorgeous. Just absolutely gorgeous. Like the animation style is second season, the not to spoil anything. I don't think this spoils anything, but just them going along the ocean. Just an amazing sequence to just sit and watch happen. And
I think if you're, I mean, I don't write books. I don't create games, but I run games. Right. And I walked away, and it really, it impacted how I create tension at the table, because his ability to create tension without like leaning hard, and like, it wasn't just the music. It wasn't just the visual. It was, he took his time. He was okay. As you're watching that, he leaves you there longer than you want to stay there, and he keeps going with it, and doesn't rush to the resolve and stuff. So you and I are on the same page. I mean, he is like, I always mispronounce his name, begins with a T, but just a brilliant storyteller, not even getting into his talent as an animator. All right, one more.
Okay. Let me think here.
And it could be, when I say recently, it could be 5 years ago, right? Because this stuff, these tend to be landmark moments, right?
Yeah. Well, I will say about a role-playing game that I'm currently just pretty excited and obsessing over, which is one that I've had for a while and I've played a while back, is Urban Jungle.
Ooh.
So Urban Jungle is put out by Sanguine Games. Sanguine is I don't know how far back they go to the aughts. I'm
not familiar with any of this. Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So they're almost all, if not all of their games are anthropomorphic, right? So they're serving a very particular audience. They did the Jade Claw, Iron Claw. These are early games of theirs. They got the Usagi Yojimbo license, and they did 2 versions of the Usagi Yojimbo game. The first one they did is one of my all-time favorite games. Like it's hard to explain. So it's a tabletop role-playing game. It is I would describe it as a little chunky, right? Like if you my games tend not to have that chunk, but I do like the chunk. If you're not familiar with Usagi Yojimbo, it's a comic about a rabbit samurai. It does samurai combat in the Kurosawa style in a way that is just with this very, I don't want to say traditional, but almost traditional style. So, okay, let me just give you a little, we can edit this out. It doesn't matter, but let me just give you a little.
I'm with you. I'm here for it. So, let's go.
So, you have, I'm trying to remember exactly how Usagi works. I don't have to go into the exact bits of it, but you have these 4 mind, body, will, and speed, I think, just 4 stats. And you have a die size in each one of them from D4 to D12, right? So D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. And then you have you probably have a die in your species, and you have which applies to certain things, and you have a die in your career, which applies. And there's a set of like so many skills. And like your career has 3 skills, your species has 3 skills. I don't know if I have the right number of them, but like,
sure.
So you include those dice whenever you're rolling those skills, and then you can get dice for the skills specifically. So you're rolling a bunch of dice, and you're trying to see how many of them beat a certain number. And when you're fighting someone, you're rolling dice to beat their highest die, and they're rolling dice to beat your highest die.
Got it.
Right? Like so. And the number you beat them by is the number of successes that you can spend on things or whatever. Now, that's just general background. What goes on in the combat in this game that I love is, well, first of all, you can, if someone's attacking you, you can dodge, or you can try to parry if you have a weapon that allows for that, or you can counterattack if you have a weapon. Most weapons allow for that, but you have to be like skilled in it or something like that. All right. So right away, if you're going to attack someone, the fact that they can roll the same dice and whoever gets the highest one does something, you're going to think about it. You're going to be like a little, I'm not sure. Now, there's that. Number two, the number of successes you get, you unlock these special things from the weapons, and they're based on the weapons. So it has this juicy set of pages that are like the Kasurigama does this, and like it's exactly what you want from like a list of a bunch of different weapons. Like I want the katana and the nodachi to be like, they're both big honking swords, but I want one of them to be different, right? Like and one of my favorite bits about that is that you have the boken, which is the wooden sword, just the like practice sword or whatever, that doesn't do a whole lot of damage. And you have the katana. But if you get a lot of successes on both of them, the boken can, like in the hands of a master, because a master gets a lot of those successes, can do exactly as much damage as the katana, which is amazing. That's great. Yeah. But then the other thing, like that's all just like damage or whatever. They have this thing like focus, where if you don't attack that round, you get this focus coin, this thing that you can spend to interrupt somebody doing something else.
Oh, nice.
And if you don't have to spend it before your next round, you can then spend it that round to do that much more damage. What this does in the game when I've run it is just, there's just this point in the beginning. Okay, I'll tell you a combat that actually happened with all the rolling and everything like that. Emily was in it. She was playing this dog who used to be a general who is no longer, and it's just kind of like going around trying not to be. And all he has is a war fan. We have a goat that's just a monster, but nobody knows it. Like he has some abilities where like the more you cut him down, the more he just keeps going. And then we have this giant sumo wrestling panda who just wants to play a game of Go. That's all he wants. And they run into this these ruffians that are messing with some peasants. These are Ronin that are like messing with some peasants or whatever. And they step up to them. And the first round, they go, Emily's character takes focus. And then one of the ruffians, because she has focus, she can use it to interrupt someone. One of the ruffians goes to draw his sword, and she just puts her war fan right on the sword. It makes the roll, stops it. And just at that moment, everyone's like, what's happening? And then someone else, I'm like, well, the Ronin aren't going to give up that quick. And then one of the other ones goes to grab for his sword. And the sumo wrestler, who doesn't, just pulls the sword out and throws it to his friend who, doesn't want to spend the turn drawing a sword. So now has one.
Oh,
and then they were
God.
like, can we buy you a beer? Can we get you something to drink? Yes, we're done. We're done with this fight. This fight is over. No blood had to be shed. So this system, the Usagi system, I love it. I've had many really fun games with it. And they recently, I say recently, I mean like 10 years ago. I'm old. I shouldn't say old about that. Most people remember 10 years ago.
But 10 years, it feels, we know like mathematically it's 10 years ago, but if you're like me, it doesn't, like you go, oh shit, that was 10 years ago.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Because I thought it was Thursday.
I don't see the copyright date on this, so that doesn't help me at all. Anyways.
Name of the game?
Oh, Urban Jungle.
Right.
Ooh, there you go.
I can see that. I'm looking at the cover now. You got that's beautiful art.
Right.
So it's got, again, we've got anthropomorphic, we got a fox, and looks like what, 1920s, 1930s?
Yeah. So it's set in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whenever somewhere in there that you want to do it. and it's, in the big city, and there's a bunch of fake big cities that are like, this one's Chicago and this one's LA and this one's New Orleans and that kind of thing. You can play, gangsters. The one we did was like set in their version of Hollywood, and one of the characters was she was a movie star that has gone past her prime, and the whole thing was about like a estate sale that she had to try and save the rest of her house, and then somebody bought a reel that turned out to be like a blue film that someone else had made, and like everyone's like trying to get it, and the mob are involved, and it was great. But so this one takes that same thing and it goes a little further, because in this one, when you go to, I'm just going to explain the combat system. Sorry about this.
That's okay.
When you take damage in this, you don't have hit points. What it is you take a number of points of damage, and you just have to reduce that to 0. If you don't, you're out. And you do that by rolling some, like, everyone has body, so you roll your body die. If it beats a 3, you can drop that by 1. Some people have the endurance skill. You can roll those and drop that, whatever. So that helps to bring it down. And then you have soaks. And soaks are these abilities that you get from your species or your career or your type. And they drop the damage by a set amount. You don't have to roll, just set amount. And then you have to do something to recover them. And the soaks are just kind of brilliant, because they're like, the clearest example of them is the distress soak, which is it'll drop 4 points of damage, which is amazing. I think it's the highest any of them does. And then what happens is all of your allies who can hear you are rallied because you're in trouble. So you play, like, we had someone who was playing this like plucky young news reporter, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to go. And so you get these from your type, which is, I'm just going to.
Oh, you son of a bitch. I'm going to buy this game.
Types like Angel. That's, I think, what that reporter was, gets the distress soak, because it's just someone that everyone likes, wide-eyed and innocent. There's the boss. There's the broken. There's, the broken gets a frenzy soak, which is... I
love this idea so much.
The frenzy soak is you drop... Oh, the broken's great. Okay, so let me just tell you, there's just these 2 gifts that the broken get. I mean, they all get 2 gifts, but like the broken gets the non-combatant gift, which says, as long as you're not attacking anyone, you can get a bonus D12 to dodging, right? To stay out of the way. You're a non-combatant as long as you don't... The moment you attack someone, you lose that until the next day, or it's been 24 hours of peace, or, whatever. I don't remember the exact thing, but like you lose it for quite a while. Then they have the frenzy soak, which says every time you take damage, you can stop 2. And then the frenzy soak is used up until you hit someone. Oh, so you have this one gift that's like, as long as you're not hitting anyone, you could dodge or whatever. But as soon as you need to start hitting someone, you just have to keep hitting them. And I was just like, this character that's just broken, right? Like this, that just like, what is it? What's the Viggo Mortensen, the history of violence, right? Like that character, right? Like that, like they brought me back in. I can't stop. It's great. And so this game is just filled with that little, like, so it's all built around that, that sort of classic structure of a role-playing game. It's got its own way of doing all of it, which is all very smooth, and I quite like it, like in how it does it. But it's these kernels, these little bits where they're like, here's a great place to put this thing to, like, the fact that this non-combatant can go around dodging, and you're like, okay, but you're dodging, you're not doing anything in combat. No. This game has, like, you can rally your allies. You can do a ton of things in combat that are just as fruitful or exciting as that. And it's just,
It's so cool. And it sounds like one of those games, and I've had this conversation many times, and I'm a firm believer that there are just some of those games where you can read it and go, yeah, okay, I'm digging this. It's making sense to me. But you got to sit at the table, because it sounds like, because there's these little kernels, like that's a great analogy. These little kernels that you read and go, okay, but until you see them planted, until you see other people watering them, you don't realize what the hell is really going on, right? You got to see it in action.
And then the payoff is just Yeah. And so I'm a big fan of Sanguine Games. They've made quite a few games out there that I very much enjoy. Some of which that do sit as I've read them. I appreciate them from having read them, but I've not had a chance to play them, and may never get a chance to play them. That's fine. Yeah, but the ones like there's a certain set of them where I'm like like I've played Urban Jungle several times. I've played Usagi Yojimbo. I guess if they begin with a U, they're good. No, they're all good, but like Myriad Song is another one, which is their space one. Which has been anyways, the reason why Urban Jungle has come back up into my purview is that recently I was just every so often I miss conventions, like that feeling of like finding something in the dealer hall, and so I go to one of the at this in this particular time I was on drive-through, and I was kind of scrolling through drive-through, and I saw that they had released 2 supplements for this that I did not know about. And I was like, oh, like I had forgot. Like, it's not that I'd forgotten the game. It's just, it wasn't on my horizon. And now it's very much on my horizon.
Oh, that's fun.
They've got like a retro sci-fi one with like atomic ray guns and aliens from each of the planets of our solar system. And they've got a supernatural one, which you have to do if you like occult horror, I think is what it's called or whatever. But
so this is the unsolicited recommendation I'm going to throw back at you. Have you come across Spencer Campbell's Slayers yet?
No.
So jot it down, and this will be the test of whether Craig understood this last 2 hours. I have a sneaking suspicion you're going to read this game, and you're going to go, ooh. So we'll see how much of a sommelier I am coming back to you. I'm also a big shill for Spencer. I think Spencer is a very interesting designer and is doing some different type of stuff, but it's one of the best implementations of asymmetrical classes I've seen. But the mechanics, each class has literally its own mechanics. Every class is playing a different game.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. And I think that you'll dig it. it. And it's worth, whatever you pay on drive-through for the PDF, I'll reimburse you if you hate it.
Oh, no, don't worry about that.
But that's back. Well, listen, there is a ton of really cool things to do on a Tuesday night, including playing some of the games we talked about, watching some of the movies we talked about, but you wasted it spending the time on my shitty little podcast.
Oh, it was a delight.
I really appreciate it. It was a real pleasure, Eppy.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed myself.
I'm glad. And he's already committed to coming back after the after the end credits. You'll hear the break. But I want everybody who's listening. I mean, you've made it. This was a long episode, 2.5 hours long. It was worth every single minute, and I appreciate you listening. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to Tabletop Talk and share it with your friends. Check out our content on YouTube and Twitch. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and stay updated on everything coming from Third Floor. All the links are in the show notes. Take care, floorheads.
That was great, my friend. Absolutely. Excellent. That's the show, dude. You nailed it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, absolutely perfect. So I arbitrarily put these in order. Do you think this is the right order? Swords, Dread, Wolf Spell, or?
I actually kind of like the order because it's not chronological for their and they don't need to be in chronological order. Yeah, I'd say let's do that order.
Okay, great. I also think we can get into Words Without Master as part of the Swords Without Master and just kind of tie that in because I think that's really, really interesting. Okay, good.
That will almost invariably happen naturally.
Good. And just to reiterate, the stuff I'm going to ask you is really, we're definitely going to learn what it is, right? Mm-hmm. But I really want to learn why it is. I want to learn how it became, right? It's all about the process here. So, but don't worry. We'll talk about why everybody should be buying the goddamn game. So don't worry. We'll get to that. That comes out of it too. So, all right, I'll bring us back. Oh, hey. Are you still here? Wow. Well, the episode is over, but if you're bored, why not go to patreon.com and support the show for as little as $1 a month? Yeah, you can just scroll down and get the link. It's Patreon that makes this and all of our other content possible. Don't you want to join the other floorheads on the Patreon Discord? Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Take care. Bye.